Well, thank you so much, Mariah, and really delighted to be here as a partner of NCCA and to bring the spotlight to a really important topic. There are many, but today's focus is going to be around really about data essentials, how to ensure compliance, and then we're going to kind of bring it together from an introduction of what are the documentation elements for quality best practice when it comes to compliance. Then we'll look at the top 5 actionable areas. And then we're going to do a deep dive with my colleague, Cindy Vian, who's joining me as co-presenter today. And she's going to walk us through some key examples about how you can manage data and operations. So we have a pretty large agenda here with everybody who's joining in. Where are you coming in from? Just while we're giving another minute for people to get in. But that's our agenda. I'll introduce myself and then I'll have Cindy introduce herself. My name is Lynn Wenger. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Executive Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for One Place Childcare. And my background is predominantly coming from the business side of the house. I have a 30-year career in systems and processes and building infrastructure that allows you to grow and scale. And I got introduced to early education about 6 years ago and fell in love with not only the mission and all the work that you're doing to change lives and to really have an impact on our future, but also the opportunity to look at one of my areas of expertise and excitement is around systems and processes. And early education has grown in leaps and bounds in this area and really treating it like a business while preserving the hard issue of being with families and children and staff so that everybody can grow and flourish. So we'll talk a little bit more about One Place as we go through this, but Cindy, would you take a moment and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Cindy Vian. I'm Vice President of Operations here for the North American operations of One Place. And my background is a little bit different than Lynn's. So having started my career in early care and education, I actually opened a family childcare business and then grew and morphed that into owning and operating my own centers before moving into the nonprofit world for about 10 years, where I sponsored childcare entities on the USDA food program. Moving from there into the technology space because I recognized that our industry tends to lag a little bit behind in adopting technology. And I thought, wow, what a great area and what a great space for me to help this industry grow and thrive by incorporating technology and best practice into their operations in order to grow and scale their operations in a really effective manner. I also like to jokingly refer to myself as your regulatory nerd, because if there is one thing that I have spent countless hours doing, it is reading regulation, interpreting regulation, and then helping others to understand how to kind of break it down into bite-sized digestible pieces and even make complying with regulations fun, if I dare say that, because there is a way to actually comply with regulation that doesn't have to be dry and boring, but it's really the foundational practice of your childcare operation. So really thanks to everyone here at NCCA for giving us this opportunity to speak with you today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cindy. And not here on the screen with us, but she's in the session is Lynn Benkel. Lynn is the Director of Operations for One Place Childcare, and she was part of the invitation if you wanted to book a one-on-one to understand more about how you're currently managing your compliance. And then you'll also have an opportunity to have access to that at the end. So we are a team bringing this to you today, and we're delighted to be here. While we're talking about places that we're going to be, another exciting event coming up is the NCCA and NECPA annual conference. And I just learned that it's the first time in 10 years that this is back in person. There's lots of programming that happens with NCCA, but we're very excited about being in person, having time face-to-face with all of you in Austin, Texas, April 25th through the 27th. As an NCCA affiliate partner, we are there, but also as a proud silver sponsor. as well as we'll be presenting on a track around compliance. So what you're getting today is an appetizer, and at the conference, you'll have the opportunity to have the full meal and really get into more of the specifics of how you can use data and to manage compliance to ensure that you are meeting the expectations, the standards, and so forth. So let's jump right in. I love to look at research to really see where we have opportunity for growth, what we're doing well, what we could be doing better or different. And for those of you who don't know Forrester Research, they're a think tank that delivers a lot of tremendous research. And they talk about 74% of organizations say they want to be data-driven, but only 29% are successful in connecting analytics to action. Actionable insights appear to be the missing link. So what is this actually saying is we all intend and want to be data-driven, but how do we actually take data and turn it into something that can be analyzed, used, and then also where there's actions that need to be taken, how do we take concrete actions and have those assigned, make sure they close, make sure that we're getting the gains that we're looking for. And that's what we're really going to be digging into for today. Another source of data that I want to bring, I participated recently in a panel with Line Leader, and they had a panel of experts from the industry. And we were talking about the future of early education, and a lot of it was driven by the ECE benchmark report. If you've not yet seen it, it is a tremendous piece of work that's been done. But I pulled out a couple of things that are relevant to today's discussion. Once again, 74%, interesting, that number came up a second time. But 74% of companies believe that they are inadequately data-driven. Next is in the age of big data, decision complexity has increased by a staggering 65%. And I would even venture to say my take on that is that the speed at which we need to respond to changes or data or indicators is probably happening at a faster rate than ever. And also in the report, they did a ranking. There are about 11 different markers, but they did a ranking of what was important and on the minds of leaders. Leadership ranked maintaining licensing compliance as the top challenge, followed by retaining existing families. So what is this telling us? A couple of things. We are at a stage in our growth as an industry where data is important. We need not be afraid of it. We have room to grow. We're actually exactly where we should be, given the industry that some of these concepts, unless you're a very large organization, some of these concepts are things that we just intuitively know, but now we're being intentional, deliberate, and gathering information. So let's look at this. We're going to launch a poll here because we'd like to hear from our participants in today's, and if you're listening to the recording, you can also take this poll question. But the question is, and Mariah is going to be launching this one, but how do you use data analytics today to manage quality and compliance? So if we've got that poll, Cindy, are you seeing it? I'm not seeing it. Mariah, are you seeing it? Or if anybody in the chat?
I am relaunching it. It looks
Okay.
like we played with it before. It got a little upset. So let me relaunch that.
If not, we've always got a plan B.
We do. I do not see it, so I'm putting it in the chat, but the next one should be fine. I'm so sorry. I cannot see this one.
Okay, so she just put it in the chat. So the poll question number 1 is, how do you use data analytics today to manage quality and compliance? And so I'm going to give you a 1, a 2, or 3. The first one is we don't, but we want to learn how to. So that'd be number 1. If it's you, put a 1. 2 is we do it manually with spreadsheets. Number 2, we do it manually with spreadsheets. Or number 3, if you're number 3, we are fully automated with business intelligence tools. So are you a 1? We don't, but we want to learn how to. 2, we do it manually with spreadsheets. Or are you a 3? We're fully automated with business intelligence tools. Okay, so you all should be able to see in the chat. We've got We've got a bit of a mix here. Don't be shy. I know there's more of you on here than have responded. Just having fun with you. Okay. I see lots of ones. So this is a great place to start. I mean, recognizing the need for data and how do you go about doing the analytics to manage quality and compliance. Just a realization that that's something that's important is a great place to start. Okay, so let's see. Sheriff, you have raised your hand if you'd like to unmute, if you have a question you wanted to ask.
You can go ahead and speak, Sharif, if you need to. You can unmute yourself.
Might have been an accidental hand raise, or she may have had a question.
I will check. Okay.
All right, we'll come back to you if you have the question, and one of my colleagues will interrupt me, I'm sure. All righty. Okay, so moving along, we're going to talk about the top 5 to thrive around data and documentation. The first area is going to be around insurance. So there's 5 areas that we're going to talk about. For those of you who are facing insurance companies who are either leaving your state or no longer providing coverage, or they're not renewing you, this has gotten the center stage. And when it comes to data and documentation, Samantha Phillips is somebody who's really very vocal about this. I know she's been on with Comploy, she's with Comploy, she's been on with NCCA, she's on social. She's a great source of information. But what I want to say around this is insurance, data, and documentation. When and where you can provide evidence and proof that you are being proactive in how you go about ensuring the safety of your children and your staff, the documentation will help you control the narrative for your renewal or for new applications. Another way in which the data and the documentation is so important is proof of documented policies around child abuse courses and conducted trainings. I've heard this has come up that there needs to be proof that has been completed. So again, the documentation and data are key. And then proof of property management. So the things that you're doing preventatively, if you're in a hurricane zone or if you're in a freeze zone. We've had unprecedented weather, as we all know, but what are the safety measures that you're taking to ensure the avoidance of claims? And even if there have been a claim, just demonstrating what you've done to avoid it. So that's one of the top 5, insurance and documentation. Next is around liability, mitigating risk, and documentation again. So what we're hearing here has to do with licensing, legal, and PR. So when there is a citation, what steps have you taken? Have it well documented, provide it to your licensor. God forbid, should it become a legal issue, you've got a paper trail that you're not scrambling to go create it retroactively. So you've also demonstrated too that you've got a system of accountability to meet the standards internally and externally. As Cindy said, sometimes licensing and compliance are the less exciting part of early education, but they become the most important part when there's an issue. So the more proactive you are, the greater peace of mind you will have in the process. And we're going to go into some examples of this as well. But the third one that I want to talk about is around succession and growth planning. One of the other things that the survey that I referenced at the start of the talk today cited was what's happening in the industry as far as growth. There is very aggressive growth that's happening right now. So it's at all levels, whether you're a single center of excellence, you're in the mid-market, private equity, or if you're a franchise, growth is happening. So when I'm talking about this, what's important here is buyer diligence goes deep, whether you're growing or selling, documented operations to replicate as you acquire or plan to sell, and then your licensing history, no known surprises or deficiencies. So Hinge Advisors also talks about this as well, and they've been talking about what's happening on the growth projections. But for sure, this is something that I see, and maybe others of you have seen this as well. We tend to think about succession planning as out there, or we tend to think of growing as when we get to it. but having a well-documented infrastructure that you can replicate when you grow, or to a well-documented infrastructure that shows this is a well-oiled machine that operates with or without you being present. So that's another key area. That's the third of the 5 top areas. Next, we're going to talk about KPIs, key performance indicators. We'll be launching a poll shortly here around this, but this is language we're beginning to see more prevalent when we talk about staff retention, when we talk about attracting staff. So sometimes you hear about a KPI that's tied to scorecards. But this is really beginning to establish that everybody plays a part. If you're accountable, when you have accountability, you have responsibility. When you know what's being asked of you and what's being measured, we tend to rise to the expectation, because what gets measured gets better. And then we are seeing time and time again that, especially when it comes to the area of safety, compliance, mitigating risk, limiting liability, educating your teams on exactly what that means and how their role down to diapering, name to face counts, playground safety, how all those things really protect your company and your brand. And then the last area that is so important, and it's something near and dear to the folks at NCCA as well as the ECEC. We're missing a C on that, but the monthly champions call, but there are bodies that are committed to advocacy and continuous improvement. And I loved, I think it was Chad Dunkley, Cindy Lanhoff, you can keep me honest on this one, but from the stage at Shift, and he said this in other, perhaps even I think with one of the NCCA calls, where he said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So if you want to have a voice and you don't want to be on the chopping block, then you have to be at the table. Cindy, did I attribute that properly to the right person?
Yes, he did say that, and that's definitely true. That's why people have to be engaged in what's happening federally and in their state with funding and weigh in.
Yes, yes. So the data, the documentation, these 5 areas, and then how it pertains to compliance, these are all focus areas where you can have a gain immediately if you begin to hone in on these areas. One other piece that I want to bring to the table here to the discussion while we're talking about data. This just recently came up, so I added it into our presentation. We're beginning to see 3 roles that may be coming to your org chart. It's something for you to consider. Sometimes you can have a fractional or a part-time person who can assist you with this. But it's one thing to have data, but just to be totally transparent, sometimes we have data and we're drinking from the fire hose of data, but we don't know how to use it. So somebody, it might be a data analyst, or for those of you that were a 3, if you want to jot in the chat what job titles you have when it came to compliance and documentation. What type of a role or job title do you have that's evaluating and interpreting what the data analytics are, what the need is? How are we using it? How are we collecting it? So be thinking about this down the road, be open to skill sets that you may have on your existing staff, as well as people who you might bring to advise you in these key areas. And then the last one that also came out of the study was a tech stack integrator or consultant. The line leader said that there were over 5,000 who participated in this study, but they were saying that 44% of tech licenses are underutilized. That's a big number. So what that tells us is you have the technology there, but how do you begin to utilize it? And it's not just your initial purchase, but how do you use technology that will grow with you, with your mission, your vision, your values, and your really your analytics needs, because that's where we're headed with technology. So that's a placeholder for something for you to be thinking about through 2024 into 25. Oh, okay, here we go. Poll question number 2. In level of importance, how do you rank the importance of compliance at your school? So the poll has been launched. Mariah was able to launch that, so you should be able to see it. Very high importance is an option. Medium, due to higher priorities taking precedence. Low importance, but intending to get more formalized. Wow, this is so far. We'll share the results in a moment. We need a few more of you to participate. We only have about 20% participation right now, so don't be shy. These are anonymous, by the way. I should have said that from the beginning. Nobody knows who's responding, so whatever your answer is, right now our number one was very high importance, which makes my heart sing. This is very, very promising. We'll go ahead and end the poll. Yeah, we'll go ahead and end the poll. I think I have to stop sharing. But we don't need to share the results on this one because the only one that got a response was very high importance. So that is amazing. So Cindy Lenhoff, if you could unmute for a second, because you and I've talked about this quite a bit, and to see the spotlight on compliance the way that it is right now, I mean, how would you compare that to a year ago?
I feel like it's a focus because we're coming out of COVID and compliance. There weren't a lot of in-person visits to schools. They were being done by video. And now that people are back in the schools, you know, looking at the classrooms, it definitely is back on track with what it was in the past. And one of the other things about compliance is that's different today is that most of it is documented and recorded on the childcare licensing's website.
Right.
And it can actually have implications for you to get insurance or to be reinsured by the company that you're with. And for me, anybody that has worked with me knows that you can't make money on my team until you're compliant, because compliance at the level of licensing is strictly minimum health and safety. And
Yes.
also there's a big cost to those centers that are trying to maintain accreditation for the additional quality funds in their states. And you have to be in compliance with licensing to, you know, to do that. So there's a lot of consequence, but ultimately the biggest consequence would be something would happen to a child that could be avoided if we were in compliance.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. In fact, somebody who I've worked closely with, Jessica Hobbs, she talks about, and this is a little bit, you know, like really catches you when she talks about client issues act as a silent killer for institutions. And what she's talking about is not only like in your case, Cindy, that you mentioned, if there was an injury or a child left behind or something very serious, suddenly it becomes the top priority. And when there has been a problem with compliance, the aftermath of compliance breach requires rebuilding everything, your brand image, your enrollment numbers. How do you instill the confidence with your families and staff that you are a safe place for their child? So I'm so glad to see compliance back in the spotlight as a top priority. So now we're going to begin to talk about, we're marrying these pieces together. How do we know the goal is compliance, and we want to take data and we want to bring that together in a way that we can ensure we know where our gaps are. So beginning with the end in mind, what data are you collecting? And in order for us to really break this down, and don't let this feel complicated, really this is intended, you would iterate through these things quite quickly. So if you're relatively new to this, data is a piece, data becomes information, information becomes knowledge, knowledge becomes wisdom, and sometimes that all happens in a split second. Other times it takes some data, it's some information to come together before you start getting an image or a perspective. So when we talk about data, did it happen? Yes or no? So an example might be in an opening procedure. Was the playground checked? Yes or no? That's just data, but information might be how well was it completed, when, and by whom. Information might also be what documentation or evidence do I have that it was completed, how well was it inspected. So we're beginning to get qualitative information from the data. Next, do I have gaps and liabilities that put children, staff, or brand at risk? And wisdom, what steps can I take to replicate best practice or level level up the rest of the team? So the way we ask questions to get the data is important. Sometimes yes, no isn't enough information, but we're beginning to interpret it. And so let's really peel back the layers of the onion to see how this looks like in practice. And I'm going to turn this over to Cindy Vian, who's going to give you lots of examples of what we've seen. So take it away, Cindy. If you can unmute, Cindy.
Yep, sorry. Okay, so let's jump right in. Some of the basic categories that we see in licensing compliance, like Cindy said, licensing compliance, you all went through a licensing evaluation and you all went and learned the foundational principles at the first stage of opening your childcare business. But what tends to happen after that is that we all just kind of assume that things are going okay unless we're shining a light on it and looking at it and examining it. And something that Lynn just said, I want you to I'm going to try to re-say it multiple times throughout the presentation. It's one thing to think that your staff know what to do and that they are doing it. And in most cases, that's completely true. However, over time, we can all get a little bit on autopilot. So what evidence do you have that actually demonstrates that your procedures are being done up to the standard of licensing compliance, and then again to accreditation standards on a regular, measurable basis? And that's really what we're talking about here. Go ahead to the next slide here, Lynn. So when we talk about them, we're going to highlight these areas as we talk about them. So SOP audits. So when you first open a business, you're all excited, you're all enthusiastic, you've got a great team put together, and most of those folks know what they need to do. Your teachers know what they need to do in order to educate the children in their classroom. Your kitchen staff know what to do to cook a healthy USDA qualified meal. You likely are working with someone maybe in the accounting department who takes care of your books, and you start to put together these sort of documents of what are our standard operating procedures. And a standard operating procedure, let's just break that down right there. Because I remember being very early in my career going, what's a standard operating procedure? So in case you're that person in the audience, all this is the steps you have to take, a document that tells you and explains the step-by-step process to completing anything inside your business. So, and you want to make sure that it's clear, it's concise. Once you've written it, hand it out to 2 or 3 people and have them read it and try to use that example, as Cindy and I talked about the other day. If you can read it without knowing anything about it and complete the task, then you've got a good standard operating procedure. But if it's been 5 years since you've looked at those standard operating procedures, it's likely that they need to be audited. And all that means is you sit down, you read through them, and you make sure that they still accomplish the goal. And that can be difficult to do and time consuming, but it'll save you a lot of money in the end game. Go ahead to the next slide. So we're going to launch one more poll because, and like Lynn, I'm going to echo this. I am thrilled to hear that you're placing such a very high importance on licensing compliance, but how do you stay compliant and ready for those unannounced visits when they occur? Because I'm going to share some of the data that I'm working and putting together from doing a really deep dive on licensing compliance visits, and it may be a little bit shocking to you. So
Cindy, while we're waiting here, we're beginning to see. So if if you can't participate in the poll, Mariah put it in the chat. I'm going to do the 1, 2, 3 again.
Perfect.
The first one is number 1, we conduct scheduled self-assessments at least once a quarter, I believe was that one. And then number 2 was our leadership does periodic spot checks. And then number 3 would be ad hoc inspections, and we want to make it more consistent. So those are the 3 options in our poll question. And right now we have number 2 taking the lead. Our leadership does periodic spot checks. Behind that is number 1, which is we conduct scheduled self-assessments at least once a quarter. And then the third is ad hoc inspections, and we want to be make it more consistent. So we'll give just one more second here.
Yep, and we had one response in the chat that was great. Jeannie says, actually, none of these apply to her center. They do monthly inspections. Wow, that is
Go,
excellence
Jeannie.
at its best, Jeannie, because here's what we know. Where focus goes, energy flows. And if you are continually measuring something, it always improves. So think about even your kids' as homework. If you go back and look at, if you just ask them, yes or no, did it get it done? Well, you know, sometimes they got it done, sometimes they didn't, sometimes they may have done it partially, yada, yada, yada. But if you actually are measuring it on, like Jeannie says, a monthly basis, you are absolutely going to be prepared for that next licensing visit. Now, don't get scared. We're not gonna frighten you off here either. If you're one of those that are having leadership do a periodic spot check, that's great. That's wonderful. You're halfway there to best practice, right? Think of it that way. Always look at what are we doing really well and celebrate what you're doing really well. And then look for how can we improve it even just this much, just a tiny bit, because every tiny little improvement leads to large improvements over time. So let's go ahead and get the poll results off the screen. I don't know if you guys are seeing them. Maybe it's only me.
Yep.
Do you mind if I mention something that worked also? In addition,
Do not mind. Go right ahead.
You know, of course, doing your, you know, self-assessments, just like licensing. I mean, there are states like Oklahoma, they have 3 mandatory visits a year. So they're going to be coming in on a quarterly basis unannounced. But one of the things that I used to really emphasize to my teams was that you can never walk past a licensing infraction in your own school that you don't stop, fix it, explain why you fixed it, and why moving forward it has to, you know, stay fixed. In other words, we have teachable moments for children. We can also have teachable moments for teachers in this way. And they also know that you're looking through, you know, the lens of licensing just as you walk through, because even though you may not get down to, you know, checking the medication or files in those daily, you know, management by walking around. But if you see right away, there's a child wandering, you know, away from the class, or, you know, you see a child hiding behind a shelf and now is not supervised. I mean, fixing it immediately.
And
Yeah.
Cindy, I'm going to piggyback on something you just said. That's also a leadership best practice, right?
Yes.
Because as a leader, if you are placing focus on that and fixing that immediately, then what happens to your staff? They notice that and they start to emulate that at the same time. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So here's an example of a way that One Place has always had this philosophy of make it simple, turn it into a simple checklist that your staff can go through and make sure they're measuring the right things at the right time each day. And as we said before, if you focus on it and measure on it, it's going to improve. So don't expect that the first time you do this, that it's necessarily going to be perfect. That's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. What you want to see is where is it not perfect, so you can bring your team together and say, how do we improve? So all of this simple stuff that you're seeing on the screen right now is just saying little champions did their licensing preparedness checklists. They were completed. You can see that in a glance. And then you can see the scoring down below that is showing, hey, one site maybe got a 95, one got a 96, and one got a 98. Still room for improvement, but they're doing quite well. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, when we're talking about standard operating procedures, that's what we're talking about here. Here is an example of a way to measure and score standard operating procedures, like your opening checklist, your closing checklist. Maybe it's your playground inspection to make sure that your playground is up to par and ready and safe for children to be engaging with their play structure. But anytime that you build those things inside of the One Place platform, you can measure it on a daily basis, you can measure it weekly, you can measure it monthly, and you have this all at a glance. And so as you can see on the screen right now, this opening procedure was done and completed on the 28th, but on the 29th, you see a little orange bar that shows it's only halfway done. 2 days out of the week, it's only showing halfway done. The other 3 days are completely completed. You'll notice down under Little Champions on the 28th, it was skipped altogether as indicated by the little red X. Someone can come in at the beginning of the day, take a quick glance. In 10 seconds, you know where you are. That doesn't happen if you're using paper checklists that get filed away. It also leads to better conversations. I can go back to my team and say, what happened on these 2 days of the week that prevented you from completing that opening checklist? Now we're looking at a measurement. So you can see in the image on the screen, this is the center opening procedures, those same scores that we saw on the bar graph before. This is showing you, and it's something you can click on and delve into to see what questions were or were not answered, what tasks were or were not completed. Go ahead to the next screen or we're going to run out of time is what I'm being told. And then at the end, you can print out this really nice report, delve into it and see what was done, what was not done. And then you can talk about it as a team. It's not a way to, take someone to task and say they didn't do their job well. It's where you can also see maybe tasks need to be spread out differently across your team. And it helps you to become more efficient and more effective. So let's skip on because we've got some really good stuff here and I know we're going to run out of time.
Cindy, just real quick here to piggyback on what you said. So if you have a low score, and you're going to see this, maybe you're going to make this point later, but if you have a low score, that's okay. This isn't high school where you're like, okay, I just got a B- or whatever it happens to be. It's really making sure that those gaps that you have honest answers so you can see where your gaps are. So don't say, you need to create a culture, by the way, where they're not saying it has to be 100% because they'll fudge the numbers.
Absolutely. You
got
want
to make sure. Yes.
Absolutely. Yep. You want to build a culture of continuous improvement and you want to see those little red marks as, okay, this is just an area we need to look at and talk about so we can help each other improve in this area. We're not looking to, whack someone over the head with this. Health and safety trends. Let's just skip on to the next one because we're going to be looking at health and safety trends. As we said before, licensing compliance is all about being at least baseline a safe environment for children to engage in educational activities, correct? So when we're talking about health and safety, we're talking about injuries, incidents, and illnesses that happen not only to the children, but even to the staff members should be tracked. And you want to look for trends. That way, when you see a trend, you can say, okay, how do we prevent this from continuing to repeat itself? Because if there's anything that we've learned in human beings over time, it's we can all get in that autopilot and not really look at, oh, wow, I didn't realize this type of incident is happening quite so often in one of my classrooms. Let's take biting. If we've got a biting problem in a 2 or 3 year old classroom and you're not measuring it, well, that biting problem can go on for a long time. And you're just simply having, you're really not actually addressing the issue then. And that can lead to other issues as time goes on. So you want to look at the data. How often does it happen? Are children getting injured? Where could we maybe improve? How do we get ahead of this? Is it a carpet that needs to be tacked down so no one trips? Is it something on the playground that maybe needs to be addressed? But as we went through this before, data is just telling you what happened, yes or no. Information is evaluating that to look at, what did we learn from this? How can we prevent it from happening again? Knowledge is, how many notifiable injuries were there? How did they happen? When did they happen? What discussions have we had with families or licensing about them so that we can prevent them from happening in the future? And that's what the level you're all trying to get to, which is the wisdom stage, where we're avoiding those liabilities so they don't turn into something even bigger. Go to the next slide there, Lynn. I think we're going to run out of time here. These are some examples of some of the reports that we offer here at the One Place platform that can help you measure exactly that. So if we're putting the data into one place, then we can pull a report and we can say, okay, classroom, LCC1 classroom had 2, looks like illnesses or stomach bugs, had 1 injury, which was a bite, had some falls or trips or bruising, and you can see, and you can measure across that. On the right-hand side, you're sort of seeing it in a pie chart, and we can look very quickly and say, okay, 22% of these are small injuries. You know, they're small things. Maybe they're bumps or bruises that just required an ice pack. But if we were seeing something bigger, we'd know we needed to address it. Let's go on to the next one. Legal liability management. So here's where people really start to get a little bit scared. What leads to liability? Well, you want to mitigate risk. You want to look at things like, when were these notifiable injuries? Was licensing notified? Again, you're looking for evidence and documentation, because if you don't have documentation to support that you notified licensing, that you notified the parent, that all of these systems are in one place where you can easily bring them up and show them and demonstrate compliance, then as far as licensing is concerned, you're not in compliance. Family complaint or a disgruntled employee, boy, this one is really one of those challenges that's a little bit scary for any business owner, because every business owner at some point has had a family leave that wasn't happy or a disgruntled employee. You want to make sure that you have files on this that document exactly what happened with dates, times, and people included in those reports. What follow-up was done with these parties? Did you have a discussion with them? Did they notify licensing? Do you need to make sure that your attorney has been notified? So in case this really does turn into a legal liability, you're prepared. Again, documentation will always protect you in these areas. Do you have any legal or PR exposure? Where is the documentation at the end of this? As I said, documentation. The reason I'm kind of pausing here is because when I first started to work with One Place, I went out and did a deep dive, and I'm continuing to do a deep dive state by state on licensing violation reports. And while all of us know that licensing compliance is important, it's really interesting when you go start doing the research. And the parents that are coming into childcare right now were born with a mobile device in their hand, and they can look up anything at any time. They don't take anyone's word for anything. They go look for the report. So what's difficult to measure in your business is, how many tours is it costing you? If you've got some simple license violation reports out there, parents are looking them up, won't even come to your center to do a tour or to even engage with you. And that's a really hard one to measure. So as I've done this research, what I've started to know, top to bottom, doesn't matter how big you are or how small you are, everyone has some licensing compliance issues. Start to track it, start to measure it, and build a community of continuous improvement inside your organization. Go ahead. On to the next one. Task to action.
Yeah, if we can combine those other two,
I thought
so. Because this tells a better picture as well. Go for it.
I agree. So we have a ticketing system built into the One Place platform. And as Cindy Lenhoff just really succinctly told us, you want to handle it right then and there. So when you notice a license violation, stop, make sure that you're taking care of that right then and there. That's another way that One Place helps childcare and early care and education programs get right on top of these things. If you notice something, you put it into the ticket. And by the way, voice to text. So if you pull out your cell phone, you can use the voice to text feature to actually enter that information into the ticketing system, and then someone can pick it up. If it's a plumbing problem, The person that you use to handle those maintenance alerts can pick it up immediately and get right on it. I don't know about you, you can put in the chat feature for us. How many of you have had sticky notes left on your desk that the toilet was backed up near the classroom, or gee, the lock on the back door or to the trash bins wasn't working anymore? That sticky note can get lost and never actually actioned on, where a ticketing system built into this, you can look at how many tickets you're getting, how often you're getting them, what kinds of tickets you're getting, and then prioritize them and start to address them proactively. Also, another part of this, great for your narrative to take to your insurance provider when you're starting to go through getting renewed for your insurance. If they can see that you have a system for taking care of these things and getting on top of them, they're much more likely to be open to negotiation with you. Let's keep going.
Okay.
I don't
We're
want to
gonna
miss out on some of this that's here.
We're going to skip the poll, Cindy, on KPIs. So let's go ahead onto the quality metrics.
Yeah, let's stop right here because I do have a couple of points I want to make here. One of the things that I would encourage you all to do that most early care and education programs don't do. You'll notice when we did that first poll, it said our leadership team is continually auditing us for license compliance. Well, what that tells me is that there is probably a center director or an assistant director who is very knowledgeable about licensing rules and regulations, going out and self-auditing the facility. I challenge you, instead of doing it that way, in your next quarter, bring your team together, hand that same licensing evaluation document, which, by the way, one place offers them for every single state in the nation. Get that licensing evaluation document from your state and hand it off to a teacher, an assistant teacher, a cook, a facility maintenance person. There is no better way to teach what licensing compliance looks like across your entire team than to make it into a game. So give them a little hat from the dollar store and say, you're going to play the role today of licensing coming in for an unannounced evaluation. Here are the questions. Here are the things they're going to go through. Don't train them. It's okay. They don't have to understand or do it perfectly, but have them go through it and try to find any area of non-compliance. And guess what? Your team will actually coach and help them all along the way. And when you do this, then come back together and talk about what that person uncovered. Because I can guarantee you, every single one of your staff members are a wonderful, very bright, innovative person who will add a different lens or viewpoint to doing that self-audit. The other thing I would tell you is when you go to teach licensing regulations and compliance, turn it into a scavenger hunt. Make it into a game where the more they learn, the better off they are, because people want to grow. People want to grow and expand in their knowledge, and they want to grow and expand in their roles. So get them all on board and create a system of continual improvement here. And you'll get ownership and accountability across the organization. I bet they'll even start to have fun with it. Replicate this, one teacher, one classroom, all the way along. One of the things you're looking at right here, we love this graph because it looks like, in one way, a spider web, right? And you can kind of see where this team is doing really well in looking at health and safety and processes and planning. If I looked at this as an owner operator or as a center director, I'd say, well, gee, I think next quarter I need to really focus in on working with my staff in some way. Because look, under dreams and goals, we're only at about 60%. Professionalism and character, we're only at about 70%. And then HR director, 67%. What that sort of tells me is I need to focus on developing my team, developing them in their roles as individuals. And maybe there's some new policies or procedures I need to be looking at in the way of taking care of my people. Put your people first and you'll be successful every day. Go ahead and go on to the next slide. So here is, Lynn kind of alluded to this, scorecards, checklists, and scoring across. If you're a larger organization and you have multiple schools, in multiple states, you're likely to want to be seeing, how are we comparing? How are we doing in this region, that region? Some of the larger organizations have area managers, regional directors. As Cindy alluded to before, she didn't want any of her team making money until they could literally ensure that the foundation of their early care and education program was meeting those basic foundational principles. Well, if you've got it built into the One Place platform, you can score them and compare them. And if one area is doing better than the other, simply ask them to come in and do a presentation. What are they doing that's helping them to excel? And those are best practices then that can spread like wildfire across your entire organization. But just simply having these measurements will tell you where to focus. Go on to the next one. I can tell we're running out of time here, and we want to make sure we have time for questions and answers.
So I'm going to make a suggestion here for our audience. You know, if there are questions, there's a couple of comments in there, you know, neat chart and so forth. Most of the rest of what we're going to go through are illustrations of different ways to represent data. So in the interest of time, if you would like a copy of the slide deck, just put your email address in the chat, or just say yes, because I know Mariah has your information. If you would like a copy of the slide deck, because you'll have lots of additional slides that you can see the graphic of the data and how it's used. We'll kind of fast forward through a couple of these, Cindy, and then highlight. So here's, if I can just go ahead.
Let me say one other quick thing. We also, at the beginning of this, had Lynn Benkill's contact information in the chat feature. If you're honestly looking and you want to learn more about what One Place offers for childcare entities, feel free to reach out to Lynn. She'd be happy to speak with you. We'll also both be at the conference in Austin. So don't worry, we're going to be around.
So succession planning, we didn't get a chance to go through that, but the key takeaways here really come down to asking yourself, how am I using data today to make informed decisions? So this little self-assessment is something that you can have as a takeaway that's in the slide deck of asking yourself, where am I today? What could I be doing better or differently? And the goal always is to be growing and best practice, and how can we share? One of the things that One Place Childcare is devoted to under our heading of compliance and best practice, we pour this information back out to the community through our blogs, through our newsletters. In fact, if you would like to sign up for our newsletter, because this is industry experts, not all of them are our clients, but it's really learning best practice from the industry, and these are schools of all sizes. Or if you would like a free consultation with somebody on our team, Lynn Benkel is here to field those. That QR code there under free consultation. If you just want somebody to say, if you share where you are, and then we can give you some feedback about what we see in areas that might become a priority for you. So there's obviously breadth and depth that we could go into on ways to look at data. Cindy loves the compliance. I love the data, and you know, they marry together to tell a picture of how we can all be the best and continually improve. We really appreciate the opportunity to be with the NCCA folks, bringing you this content in this webinar.
I think, Lynn, we should take some questions if we can.
Absolutely. If anyone has any questions that they would like to put in the chat, feel free to do that right now. I've also included those links in the chat for scheduling consultation and for joining the newsletter, as well as Lynn Benkel's information. If there's anything.
The questions that we had, we were tackling as we went along, or you covered them in the slide deck, Cindy. So I think we're in pretty good shape on that from what I see.
I have a question.
Yes,
Right.
I may have missed this, but the spider web chart really spoke to me because it, you know, had the HR piece on it and the professionalism piece. Tell me where that information comes from.
Sure. I'll start it off, Cindy, and feel free to add in. So behind that, Cindy, and I probably should have brought this up earlier on, the data is a representation of what you're capturing from a checklist. So a checklist would be looking at those 5 to 7 areas that were on the axis around the web. So that becomes the place where you're gathering that from. So it might be a scorecard, or it might be a standard operating procedure. It might be a self-audit. So it's a graphical representation of what you're capturing in a checklist, rather than going back through the paper. If it's paper-based or a spreadsheet, it's getting that graphical representation. And then the distance, of course, is where those gaps are at a glance that become either professional development or things that could be a liability for licensing and or insurance. Does that answer the question?
It does. So does the One Place Childcare application provide that in the use of the checklist that's specific in nature to that?
Yes. So
Okay.
the short answer is yes. When we work with clients, we have a library of best practice checklists. You're welcome to use that and become an editor versus an author. Some schools already have it well documented, their SOPs, standard operating procedures, well documented, or scorecards, and they want that to be digital in the One Place environment. And that's doable as well. So you can come at it from either side.
Okay,
Good question.
thank you. I did want to say that I won't say who, but 2 of the individuals on this call I have had the pleasure of working with. And both of them were very, very dedicated to compliance. And ultimately, it made me think of the statement that what fascinates me as your supervisor will fascinate you. And that's exactly the approaches of these 2 individuals. There was never a doubt that compliance was what they both expected in the centers they owned or directed.
That's beautiful. Oh. I just want to also, I think it was Regina, somebody keep me honest here, but Regina was saying that they do their audits on a weekly basis. So we, instead of quarterly, some do it on a monthly and others were doing it on a weekly. So the more frequent, the better. I wonder if those were the 2 individuals you were talking about, but either way.
I will go ahead and tell you Regina is, and her compliance record with the state of Kansas is typically 100%.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm not surprised that she does weekly. And you know, most directors today are in and out of classrooms, you know, verifying their counts, and their face to name process requires a manager in many cases to, you know, double check and sign off. And that's a good time to at least once that even, you know, just do the glance, you know, that I talked about, but then the once a week, checking those, you know, even if you're checking the top 10 things or the things that, you know, maybe you've been written up for in the past, because you know that's where your vulnerability is.
Yes.
Well, it's absolutely amazing that there is a tool out there that actually can help the tracking piece, because I do know, having been that spreadsheet person and having gone through books of licensing visits to put together, you know, patterns
Yes.
that could cause an issue with licensing, because that's what they do too. They don't always look at the just the I guess the more threatening circumstances to children, but they look at what I know in Oklahoma, they called it numerous repeated non-compliances. So they might be not, you know, it may be that, you know, you're always out of paper towels. And at some point, it's like, okay, these are numerous and repeated. We got to fix these.
That's exactly right. They can, and sometimes I think, you know, especially through COVID and the staffing crisis, we can start to get complacent with that and not realize how often that being out of paper towels, which seems like such a simple minor thing, right? But after a while, even that becomes something that could shut your business down. So you've got to look at it, you've got to evaluate it, and you've got to put a system in place to prevent it. We call it in the food program, we call this 100% compliance, and they had a standard term where if you'd been out of compliance once, you had to guarantee that your process was going to fix it permanently. And there's another word, permanent resolution or something. So that's what they're looking for.
Over to you,
Absolutely.
Mariah.
Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. I know that we ran over a little bit, but it was for a great reason, and I'm not at all upset. This is very important information, and all of the data we went over is so key. So thank you both so much, and we're so appreciative of our partnership with One Place, and we're very, very excited to see you in Austin. So for everyone who is on right now, who didn't already know, we are hosting a conference in Austin, Texas this April, the 25th through the 27th. And we are actually sold out, which is a great problem to have. However, we've had a lot of really amazing interest. And so if you are interested in joining the wait list, we are in the midst of making some very interesting discussions with the hotel staff. So if we can get at least 30 people who would want to join this amazing leadership conference with us in Austin and come see our amazing friends, One Place and several others of our partners and more, please scan that QR code. If we can get you to commit, we will go forth and open up our registration for those 30 individuals. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to see you all in Austin. Next, if you already are going, please don't forget to book your hotel rooms. We have a very amazing discounted rate with the hotel, $189 a night. And why deal with Austin traffic? You don't want to do that. Just stay, you can take the elevator, and then you can get all the extra sleep, because those sessions, they start early and we want to hit the ground running. So please scan the QR code make sure you get your rooms booked before the March 25th date. We don't want you to miss out on those amazing savings. And again, if you have any questions about anything in general, please just email us. I will make sure that in all our follow-up after today, we include those amazing resources from our presenter, as well as our email. If you have any questions about anything, you can always contact us. We love to stay in touch with everyone. Follow us on social. Can never go wrong with that. We're hoping to have some amazing pictures as the conference rolls on in, so please stay in touch with us. And with all that, we will see you next month. So I appreciate everyone today. And thank you so much, Lynn and Cindy. And we'll talk to you soon.